Hey guys, StarCraft here, and I haven't done one of these in quite a long time. Last time I tried it was a bit of a disaster with Perch, but hopefully this goes a lot better. With me I have Mark Pellegrini and Tim Lim, the guys I've been talking quite a lot about lately. And, well, can you blame me? The guys have done so much for this, for the crowdfunding comic books. So, say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hi guys, what's going on?
So yeah, like I said, I've been reading so much of your work lately. I bought a bunch of your works and all that. Just went over Thump a few days ago, and you guys impressed me with how much you guys get out the door. I mean,
Well, we try.
Yep, adding Black Ops, Common America Volume 2, and Walmart, the end of the trilogy, Magalorian. That's like 13 books, you alone, Tim, and minus a few since you didn't write them all with you, Mark. It's wow.
So Tim and I, we kind of have a system where while I'm writing the next book, he's drawing the current one, and then then I start writing the next one, and he starts drawing the last one I wrote. So I'm always writing the next one. He's always drawing the current one, and we're always like in tandem. So that's how we've been able to produce so much.
Yep. And what about the times when he's working on someone else's book?
That gives me time to work on my other stuff. Like I have a novel coming out in July. Basically, while Tim was working on Soul Finder, I was using that time to write my novel and also a short story that just got published in Cursova. So I do I get to do my prose work while Tim's working on other people's projects.
Well, now I really want to ask, how did you guys first meet? Was Thump your first collaboration, and where did it go from there?
So the way we met was, it's funny because it was like the Wild West of the internet when there weren't that many review sites for movies and stuff like that.
Wow, that far back.
Yeah, so both of us were actually film critics. And at the time we were both in college, and it was one of those things where we were basically paid in movie tickets to just go and write reviews. And so he and I got to talking. I think our first collaboration, it was actually funny because it was a site that's not functioning anymore. It was called, I think it was called Split Reason. And they had like a t-shirt contest, or at the time I was contracted to do some merchandise for them. And I knew that Mark was a pretty clever guy. So I asked him, what do you think would be a neat thing we could come up with? And both of us like retro, like 1980s video games. So he was like, why don't you do a shirt that's like Castlevania, but with Yummy Mummy, and just call it Chocovania? And and that was the first time he and I actually spoke like on the phone. And so we did it, and they loved it. And since then, we just collaborated doing a lot of these mashups and stuff like that. This was, oh my gosh, like I want to say 9 years ago.
2007 was when we were. So 2007 was when we were doing the film critic thing online, and I think the first T-shirt we collaborated on, the Count Chocula one, that was only a couple of years after that. So it's probably been 10 years or more.
Yeah.
Yep. But as far as your doing comics, or again with Thump, for example, was that your first actual book you guys did together?
Yes, that was our first book. And it's funny because prior to that, I never had a desire to really do anything in comics or publication. But in case anyone is surprised, I am a very strong supporter of the president, and I think so is Mark. And so it was more like a passion project where we just thought to ourselves, we don't really, we never thought that we wanted to work in comics at all. That was kind of bottom of the barrel in terms of what we were looking forward to doing. But we thought we have this opportune moment that we can seize where no one is trying to put something out there that is in favor of the president, or at least in a positive light. But given that we followed the 2016 election very, very, very closely, I mean, it just wrote itself. I think Mark came up with the primary script of Thump in under 2 weeks, and we had the whole thing finished in less than a month. So it was a very quick turnaround time as far as that's concerned.
Wow. And whose idea was it to go with the children's book format?
Whose idea was that, Marco? I think it was both of us kind of together.
Yeah, it was Yeah, basically, you came up with the idea of Thump. Like, you came up with that name, and you did that first drawing of a rabbit Donald Trump that I think like you did as almost like a gag, and then like, oh, that looks like a storybook drawing. And then I started writing those couplets, the little poems to go with each one, like a storybook. So we just kind of came up with it together. But yeah, Tim just drew that one little doodle of a rabbit as Donald Trump and named it Thump, and then pretty much it just all kind of like wrote itself from there.
So yeah, but then how'd you go from Thump? Now Brett Smith was involved with this as well, obviously, as your editor. Correct.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Correct.
Now, how'd you get from that into My Hero Macadamia?
So we got our feet wet working on Thump, and that was a lot of fun. And we have some friends at Antarctic Press, and we'd known each other for quite a while, I think 3 years at that point. And he said, "Hey, have you guys ever thought about doing a comic?" And again, so that question came up, and I said, I never really wanted to do a comic. I thought Thump was kind of a one and done. And he said, "Well, just to let you know, Antarctic Press makes these political parodies. So if you have an idea for political parody and you shoot it to them, we can give it a look. And since it seems like you guys are kind of leaning more towards a pro-Trump satirical viewpoint, I'm pretty sure they would be cool with that because it would be very counter. It would be different than what you would expect. Most people would expect kind of anti-Trump stuff." So one day I was watching some anime, and I was watching My Hero Academia. I'd never seen it before. And in the first episode, I see All Might, and not even 2 seconds of seeing him, I was like, "That's Donald Trump." And
so many people have thought that.
I know, and so I immediately went online and I was doing searches for like All Might Trump, Donald Trump, All Might POTUS, All Might 42, nothing. And so I think at night I just kind of sat down and I just jotted these notes, and I was, instead of All Might, he's Wall Might, but he acts exactly like All Might because he's so like fervently pro-American. And so the next day I had lunch with Mark and I said, "Okay, this sounds crazy, but let's work on this comic." Antarctic Press has said that it's not like they greenlit it, but they basically were very, very encouraging and said, "Hey, if you're willing to do it, then we would give it like the strongest look-see imaginable." And so Mark sat down and watched My Hero Academia, at least the first 3 episodes, just to get a feel of the character.
That was the hardest research I ever had to do because I really don't like that show.
Oh,
I do, like, to an extent. I keep up with it. I think it definitely skews to a younger audience, but I enjoy it enough that I keep up with it to this day. But long story short, that's how we came up with My Hero Macadamia, and it was very fruitful for us. I think as of 3 weeks ago, it's on its 9th printing, so it is selling very, very well.
Yeah, I'm not sure which printing I bought from Antarctic Press. I think it was their 7th I got.
Oh yeah, the way you can tell is if you look on the inside at the very bottom on the inside front cover, it will actually say it. Yeah, 7th. Yep. It'll say in bold letters.
Yep. But so you went from there. Obviously, it exploded in ways you guys never imagined. So next was Black Ops. So what led to that?
So Black Ops was actually supposed to be a spin-off of
My Hero Macadamia.
Yeah, and we're going to use the Marlon Brando character.
Which is one of those things where I'm so glad that we changed our minds. This is why second drafts exist, because it was originally going to be Marlon Brando's adventures. If Thump was about Donald Trump as a rabbit, it's going to be, what is Marlon Brando doing? And he's going to be like a secret agent or a commando. And we came up with all these great ideas, but all the ideas we're coming up with were so interesting. We kind of thought, like, well, let's make it an original IP, an original character, but it was still a comedy at that point. And when I wrote the first draft of the first volume of Black Ops, it had the same sense of humor and the same tone as My Hero Macadamia. And Tim read the first draft of the first issue, and he was basically like, "Mark, this is really good, but I think it would be better if we just played it straight and let the humor be just from the fact that the premise, which is outrageous, is being played straight." So he just took like a red line and just redlined all the jokes out of the first draft, and I just did a second draft that was like basically very serious. If you read volume 1 of Black Ops, it takes itself very seriously. And so I rewrote it as like a very stone-faced action story, and I think it turned out so much better that way. I'm really glad we made that change.
My favorite point and part in the whole thing is what really exemplified it all was the point where you have the 2 North Koreans in the bunker, and Usagi, I'll just say that, USAGI takes out the knife, boing, 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 ah, ah, boing, 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 boing. That sold me. That moment sold me on the whole thing.
Most people, whenever they tell us of their favorite moment, they like the part where he pulls the grenade and he kicks it at the guys.
Was great too. That was
we always
great too.
get that one.
Yeah, but I think though that point with the knife, that's what sold me, because you just see this the bouncing in and the bouncing out. You're just like, you wouldn't be any the wiser if you were looking like you do from the outside. You're like, what happened there? That bunny just went right through a disaster. You wouldn't even think the bunny did it.
I think that's the that's the only joke in the script that I think actually made it through intact. Him going into the pillbox, killing everybody, and hopping out the other side. Like that's the only joke from the first draft that didn't get red line and got left in there.
I think a lot of and when we try to describe the book to people, one of the examples we use is like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Whenever TMNT was first pitched, it has a ridiculous premise, but Eastman, I think the beauty of it is Eastman and Laird, they play it straight. It's not a joke. In their universe, like that just so happens to be the circumstances that these characters come about. And I think that what we try to tell people when we're describing Black Ops is it's actually kind of perfect in the sense that no one suspects the rabbit. I mean, if I told you there was a story about a dog that was like a specially trained canine, everyone would believe it, because in reality, we kind of have those. I mean, the SEAL Team 6 uses them. And dogs have been used throughout history as military animals. But a rabbit, if you were able to train a rabbit to do infiltration, it would actually be perfect. Everyone thinks that rabbits are benign. They're just kind of sitting there. They're cute. They're cuddly. They can't do anything. But I mean, they're tiny. They can crawl into like ducks and stuff. You would never suspect them when you see them. And so I think that scene, as far as introduction is concerned, I'm really glad you liked it, because I think that served the purpose very well.
Now, I also noticed with the first Black Ops, USAGI basically looks like he's like a normal bunny, but in the follow-up, Hair Trigger, he looks a bit more stylish. Was that so you can get more out of him and not be limited by a realistic bunny?
Not really. What happened was we had already gotten Matt Weldon to help us with the second book. And Matt Weldon, I mean, I think most of your listeners will know who he is, but he is a very prolific artist. I mean, we have seen this guy in person. Like, we're good friends. So we've attended several conventions together. We've had dinner together. Great guy. But he's fast. He's one of the fastest artists I've ever met. And when we basically got him to join us, he was like, "Oh, cool! I'm gonna draw these characters." So he not only drew Patriotter, who we wanted him to initially start off with. He went ahead and just drew his version of CGI, and when he did it, he drew him the way that he appears in Hair Trigger. You know, kind of like the longer mane. He actually resembles my rabbit, so I think he drew inspiration from how my rabbit looks like. So a little bit hairier, a little bit fluffier, kind of a sleeker look. And he was like, "I hope you don't mind, but I took some liberties with your character." And I showed it to Mark, and I said, "I think we're just gonna go with this because I like the way he looks." But the way we describe it in the book is USAGI as a cryptid, like as a modern day cryptid. He has full range of his genus's genetic lineup, so he can access anything. If he wants to look like a certain breed of rabbit at any time, he could theoretically access it. So just a spoiler, but in Black Ops 3, he undergoes yet another change. So you're going to notice that he looks different in the third book as he does from the second book as well.
Ooh, that's cool. Now, yeah, this whole notion, because I know it's in the first one, aside from, I just blanking on the cat's name, Tatzelworm. Aside from that, you really don't set up that much about, the lore. It's like this is like the pilot movie, and then once you got into Hair Triggers, when you really built up the entire lore for everything. Where did that come about? Was that there from the beginning, or did you guys come up with it as you went into Hair Trigger? You know, the idea of the inducing intelligence events and all that.
Well, so Volume 1 was his origin story, and we wanted Volume 1 to be very character focused. Because you needed to care about USAGI and Penelope, and we had to sell the premise of the universe first before we stepped up into this cryptic versus Black Ops as an organization kind of thing, which is what we established in Hair Trigger. One thing Tim and I don't do, and something when people ask us for advice that we suggest they also try to avoid doing, is don't dump your entire story Bible into your first issue or into your first volume. That's what you don't want to do. You want to pace yourself, and you want to introduce your ideas and your concepts piecemeal as your story progresses. You don't want to have too much exposition. It's also called info dumping, where you just like everybody just spews out the entire premise of your book all at once, and you introduce every character in one huge deluge, and it's just too much. So
believe me, I'm not going to do that when I do my book.
And so I know it was common like way back in the day, but publishing and the way we tell stories through media have changed. They've evolved, and people don't really do that anymore. So we did have this idea of how we're going to have this ongoing story of what USAGI was going to do next after his origin story was told in the first volume, the kinds of extra characters, supporting cast that were going to be with him, those sorts of things. And we do come up with new ideas as we go along, but we always have a story arc and a plotted framework that we build towards as soon as we start our stories. And it's the same thing with Common America. We have an entire story arc plotted out because, you can't really tell a solid story unless you know where you're going with it from the outset.
Yeah. Now, for clarification, Rigger Tortoise is just a regular tortoise that's been enhanced, correct?
Yes. He's just a normal animal. He's not irradiated.
Right. I remember them stating that. And I got to say also, Patriotter, which, as you say it, I now get the joke. I liked how he's basically, because he's more feral than USAGI, he's basically, a bit more of the, which I'm not going to say lone wolf, but he's lone wolf, but still gets the job done.
Yeah. Well, we thought of him as like the Raphael of the group.
Exactly.
Kind of thing.
That's exactly what I was thinking, which is ironic since he's dealing with a tortoise on his team. But I did find that and that Hair Trigger as well to be very clever. Now, I got to ask, who's the dog at the end of Common America that's on Black Ops?
That is a surprise. So you'll find out in Black Ops 3 who that character is.
All right.
I don't. Do we want to spoil the name of the character? I don't know if we want to do that.
We've said it on Twitter, but only the people who really follow us with super regularity on Twitter have probably heard the name. So let's let that be something just for those folks, and everybody else can follow us on Twitter for all the details.
All right. Now, I've been getting backwards a bit to Walmart Part 2. With all that, that clearly, while the first one was obviously you more taking the homage to My Hero Academia, with a few other things like Attack on Titan. I know with Walmart Part 2, you started to more go directly at the comic books, obviously, with some of, ruining the characters. But with the character of Warhen, that surprised me how that eventually led into Common America. Was that planned from the get-go as well, or was it more of a case of, we like this character?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. When we came up with the Warhen character, the impetus for it was going to be just a throwaway gag, and I posted the concept art online where I was like, hey, here's some of the characters we're going to introduce in it. And the response I got, I think that was like the most retweeted thing I put up was that the character design, and that always sat with me because I just thought, okay, I did have a background in, I wouldn't say fashion design, but we basically did art for apparel. And so people seem to have liked the character design as far as her appearance is concerned, but it always kind of bugged me because I just thought we should be able to do something with this. then I approached Mark and I said, the Trump stuff isn't going to last forever. Eventually, we're going to run out of jokes, and if nothing more, he's not going to be president at some point. So we need something a little bit more perennial. Why don't we have a character that we can use for future political works? And so that's essentially how she started. But over time, we've had, like a year to kind of think about the character. She's progressed far more than just that, because not that we don't like the political commentary, but I feel like having a character that can be a little bit more universal in terms of just things that will be true 10, 20, 30 years from now, that to me seems a little bit more important. So I think of all the characters we've come up with, she definitely underwent the most change from how we initially thought about her to where she ended up.
Yeah, because I know at the very end of the point where we're talking with Wanpool, he mentions Marvel Washington. She says, I can't sew. But in Common America, she's pretty much coming with designing some of her stuff. I'm like, that's a bit of a change.
That story's not that's
on Mark's
non-canon.
fault.
We hadn't. So that's non-canon. We actually had just come up with the name Common America. So we were trying to come up with a name that would replace Warhen, because we didn't really like that name. So we were trying to come up with patriotic superheroine names, and that you want a brain challenge. Try to do that and find one that isn't already used or trademarked by someone else. Like we couldn't find anything. And then Tim finally said, like, what about Common America? Like Common Rider, but this will be like the American Common Rider, Common America. And I was like, that's perfect. That's great. And then from that, we were able to say, like, oh, if we call her Common Rider, then we can, or Common America, then we can bring in all these Japanese tokusatsu ideas into the mix, and we can bring in kaiju, and we can bring in Sentai stuff and Ultra series stuff and all these ideas, and that really helped her stand out. But we did that one page in the back of Wall Might 2 as a joke. But even if you read her bio in the back of Wall Might 2, the little write-up we did, it also has discontinuity with Common America Volume 1, because we basically kind of rebuilt her from the ground up. So a lot of that stuff isn't quite canon. That's more like a prototype of her.
Now, it's because of the whole thing with, like you said, Trump not going to last. Is that why you guys are ending Wall Might with as a trilogy?
Yeah, we don't want to jump the shark, so to speak. So basically, I obviously, like, in terms of how we work together, I am the machine, I'm the muscle, and Mark is the brain that kind of fuels it. So even though I trust Mark to be able to write these jokes, the reality is that we both agree you can only write a Trumpian character for so long before you've written every joke that you can possibly write about that character. You just have to understand that there's a time to kind of give up. And so what happened actually is, for My Hero Macadamia, it pokes fun at like anime. In Wall Might, it's poking fun at comics. Now in the Magalorian, it's really obvious what we're poking fun at, which is kind of Star Wars science fiction. There's some science fiction that we're making fun of, so it's kind of like a Spaceballs type thing. But I don't want to spoil it, but it has a lot more depth to it. It goes out on a very, very good note in terms of I can't wait for like Marmaduke fan to see it and view it. I know he's going to appreciate it. We don't want to spoil it, but it touches on a very, very political issue that no one, I think, has covered so far. And I think it's a very sweet way to finalize it. And so I think he goes out very well. And so we're just very proud as to where the trilogy overall just concludes.
Well, you're making even more looking forward to it then. I'm glad I backed it day one.
We're glad you did.
This, Robert. So it is controversial. Like, I'm actually surprised it hasn't leaked yet, but it might be one of the books that gets banned. I'm just telling you, if they find Volume 3, that they should probably get it, because we talk about something it's a very sensitive topic for a lot of people, but we tell it in a very lighthearted way. But you know how in our climate right now, even like things that we consider to be fairly benign years ago are considered very controversial now. So, but we had fun with it. That's all that we can really say.
Right. Now, obviously, these are all part of the same universe. Now, Black Ops, Common America, Wall Might. Is there going to be more overlap besides Common America and Black Ops? Like, are some of those other heroes like Ice Testosterone and all that going to ever pop up again?
I'll let Mark answer.
Well, so now that Wall Might is concluded, moving forward, the two IPs we're going to focus on are Common America and Black Ops. We already have Common America plotted out for its first story arc, and Black Ops is already coming close to filling up its first trade paperback worth of story arc. So for those characters that premiered in Wall Might 2, who are also parody characters the way Warhen was, we don't have any plans for them yet, but that's not saying that they won't ever appear. And maybe even the same thing as Wall Might. I mean, he still exists within that universe. So the door is always open for those characters if we have a good idea for them. But they did Ice Tosterone and
Marmot Maiden.
Yeah, Marmot Maiden.
Yeah.
They started out as, obviously, they're parody characters the same way Carly did as Warhen. So if they do reappear, I think I'd want to rework them to be a bit more individual and unique, the same way we reworked Warhen into Common America. That's going to be for later down the line, once we finish all of our world building with this first story arc.
All right. I thought Marmot Maiden was like one of the ones where I'm like, I want to see a bit more of her, you know. I'm a Squirrel Girl fan. So I want to see what you guys could have done with that, but I understand. But
yeah, and that was a lot. That was a lot of fun too. We just have to be. One thing about Wall Might is it's clearly a parody where they're close enough in similarity to their characters that you can tell either by name or by visibility who they are. But with Common America, we've taken enough remoteness with the character so that you only see kind of a vestige of Miss Marvel. So I think it's only in the name. Like, you know, you have Carly Vanders as opposed to Carol Danvers. It's kind of like Wade Wilson in Deadpool and Deathstroke. Even to this day, you'll meet people and you'll point that out, and they'll be like, "Oh, I never noticed that their names were so similar." It's like, yeah, because you know, Deadpool was a parody of Deathstroke. Yep. He's separate. He's so far removed now that most people don't even realize how similar at one point they used to be.
Yep, but now what's also with Common America, I also noticed that with a lot of your styles, you've gotten even more and more manga or anime-esque with your designs. Is that intentional, or is that just how you become your preferred style? Because with Soul Finder, you're very good as well at drawing more realistic styles. So yeah, I was just curious on that as well.
It's just a gradual progression, I think. Like, for example, in Black Ops 2, what I was trying to do was actually aid Matt Weldon, because you know, he helps me with drawing techniques and stuff like that, and I love his style. I mean, besides us being friends, I really do think, as far as like my top 10 artists whose work I study, he's definitely up there. But I think really what it boils down to, Mark has known all my work for a decade now, and he knows that, especially working in merchandising, I never got a chance to actually work on a style that was completely my own, because I was always told to draw like other people. We would have like a t-shirt design, and you know, maybe a new wave was in vogue that year, or maybe Art Nouveau was the new hotness, and so we had to learn how to adapt to that. And because of that, I never actually got the chance to sit down and think, like, if I had a chance to do it my way, what would it turn out like? And so I think that what we're doing with these books is it's largely experimental, leading towards a more cartoony anime type style. So for example, like the women I draw tend to be more anime-esque, but I think the men, they lean more Western in terms of features and construction and things of that nature.
Right. Because I know it's like with Penelope or Penny from Black Ops 1 all the way to Common America, definitely a major change.
Yeah, her eyes get bigger, that's for sure. Yeah. Her hair gets poofier. And in Black Ops 3, it's a major change, because I just redesigned the characters from the ground up. It's still in continuity as far as the story is concerned. There's still that progression there, but you're right, it is very different. I was actually rereading Hair Trigger 2 nights ago, and I just thought, oh my gosh, this was only a year ago, and look how different the designs are now.
Right. Now, with Trump Space Force. Were you also expecting that to blow up as much as it did?
Yes, in a way, because at that point we were pretty much the only ones doing Trump-related books. But most people forget that it was actually Chuck Dixon's, and whenever you have Chuck Dixon's thing, I mean, it's gonna do well. And I think it was the fact that that team. I was actually the odd man out because I was the only professional. Everyone who worked on the book, from Brett Smith to Chuck to Graham Nolan to Dave Torm, these are people who have been in the industry for at least 20 years. And I'm the newcomer to it. And I just kind of laugh because occasionally you'll hear people be like, oh, that was Tim Lim's book. And I'm like, no, I was just the hired help. Like, I was just there to draw. And then Mark came in and helped punctuate the script as far as like, the comedy is concerned. Our overall contribution to that book, I would say, even though like I drew it, I would say that it was Chuck's name attached to it that really drove it.
Gotcha. Now, I just want to ask this, whose idea was it for calling those mechs the Aiden Paladins? Because I know about Aiden Paladins, so I was just curious whose idea that was.
I think that was me. I don't even know if Mark. Yeah, I don't think Mark knows who Aiden Paladin is.
I don't even know what that is.
She's a YouTuber.
It's a YouTuber, yeah, YouTuber.
Okay. So, I mean,
just a really cool name.
So just for full disclosure, on Trump Space Force, I had a really minor part in that one. Chuck Dixon wrote the whole script. Tim asked Chuck if it was okay if I did a punch-up of the Trump dialogue to make it sound more Trumpian because I'd had experience with the My Hero Academia and Thumb books and stuff, and Chuck said that was okay. So I did a punch-up of the Trump dialogue, added a few more jokes into the dialogue, and then Tim sent that back to Chuck. Chuck did his edits, so he got approval of the changes that I made, and then that was it. So I had a really small part in that one.
Gotcha. That sounds cool. But now going forward with Common America and Black Ops, like how far do you see these books going? And again, without giving any spoilers, of course, like anything you want to tease going forward?
So we were actually having this talk an hour ago when Mark and I were driving to the convention, but we have it in our minds, at least the general plot. I would say 3 to 5 volumes out, and in 5 volumes. It's just we already know where it's going to go that far into the future. But one thing that we are going to do is at some point they're going to be book ended. Anything can happen. We live in crazy times. Anything can happen to either him or to me. And we want to make sure that the story that we want to tell is told in its entirety so that anyone can just pick up the beginning and the conclusion of it. That's indefinite. I don't know where that ending is going to be, but we don't want to keep it long lasting to the point where, again, I'm going to use this term again, jump the shark. We don't want to reach that point where we just create for the sake of creating. We always feel that anytime we tell a story, there needs to be a purpose and there needs to be a direction in terms of where it's going. But right now, honestly, we're having too much fun. So I would say at least for another foreseeable future, 2 to 3 years, definitely, and then we'll see what happens beyond that.
Nice. Now, just to get this out and to bring this up, and Denny O'Neil just passed away today, and man, what a blow to the industry. So, anything you guys want to say about how much his works influenced you at all in any way, be it as just a fan or?
Yeah. I mean, Denny O'Neil, he wasn't just a writer, he was also an editor. And Chuck Dixon on Facebook, he worked directly with Denny O'Neil, obviously, especially like in the 90s through like Nightfall. Denny O'Neil was, the editor on that. And so Chuck, if you want to go check him out on Facebook, wrote a really nice memorial to Denny. But Denny was very, very talented. I didn't agree with him politically. He was very far left. But that didn't change the fact that he is still one of my all-time favorite Batman writers. And as an editor, he directed the Batman line from like the 80s through the 90s.
I think till No Man's Land was his farewell.
Yep. And that's actually where my collection of Batman, at least, chronological story, I ended at No Man's Land. In my headcanon, that's the finale for Batman, which makes sense because that's when Denny left.
I can't think of a better spot.
Right? I mean, that's about as far as you can go with Batman. So, I mean, Denny O'Neil is He was the guiding hand for, I guess, my generation of Batman, how I view Batman. Even the people like Bruce Timm and all them who worked on Batman the Animated Series, they were taking their inspiration from Denny's era of Batman from the 70s and the 80s. And Denny even wrote episodes of Batman the Animated Series. I mean, he was the Batman guy. And he wasn't just the Batman guy. Denny did a lot of other stuff. Like, I know
Green Arrow.
Yeah, great. So that's the thing. I don't really care for hard traveling heroes, the Green Lantern, Green Arrow, but I understand a lot of people love it. It's very influential. But I don't want to dwell on the stuff he wrote that I didn't like. I mean, he also was the first person that Jim Shooter hired when Marvel was contracted by Hasbro to take all these Japanese robot toys and create a mythology for them as the Transformers. They contracted Marvel to do it. Jim Shooter originally assigned Denny O'Neil to it. And Denny O'Neil was only on the project for a brief time before he had to leave, and then Bob Budiansky came on. But Denny O'Neil's big claim to fame on Transformers is that he's the one who came up with the name Optimus Prime. So
awesome.
Yep, he'll always have that credit associated with him and Transformers. And it's funny because there was an interview and someone asked him about that, and he basically said, "Did I name him that? I don't remember naming him that." Because he was only on that job for like a week before he got pulled onto something else, so he doesn't even remember doing it. This name that's synonymous with Transformers. It was just something he came up with on a job, and it was just a thing he did one week. No, he was a very talented, very amazing writer, and he was the Batman guy for several decades.
And let's not forget that he's also the one who created Obadiah Stane for Iron Man. And when people think Demon in the Bottle, I've noticed they usually lump in Denny's work into it, them not realizing, there was a big gap between those two things.
No, I've read his Ironmonger story arc, which actually lasted a really long time. And Ironmonger as Obadiah Stane is only in one issue. Obadiah Stane's in a bunch of issues as an enemy of him, but he only becomes two. Yeah, he was there for a long time, but he only became Ironmonger for that one issue, which is a fantastic issue, one of the best issues of Iron Man ever read. It has a very conclusive ending. I don't think Marvel's ever brought Obadiah back. I think they gave him a son, but Obadiah is pretty dead. He killed him off pretty seriously.
Blasted his head off.
Yeah, and it was actually really good. But he did some great character work on that. No, his run on Iron Man is a little underrated, but obviously the MCU didn't mind mining his run for ideas because Obadiah was the first villain in the MCU. So he's very influential.
Yeah, but I would say the one thing I do not ever agree with him on was his belief that if Batman ever caught his parents' killer, he'd give up the cowl. I still don't get where he got that idea from.
Me neither. I think Denny was the one who, and this is one of those decisions that I don't know how much of it was his and how much of it was the other DC editors in the 90s, but post Zero Hour, it was decided that they would change the continuity so Joe Chill didn't exist and Batman didn't know who killed his parents.
That was his idea. That was his
Denny.
Idea.
Yeah, okay, Denny did come up with that. So no one's perfect. Denny did have some bad ideas, and that was one I didn't care for. It was eventually reversed, and Joe Chill was brought back into continuity and everything. But that was one of those ideas that, I don't agree with you on that one, Denny. Sorry.
Yep. Now, what about you, Tim? Did even just reading the comics, did anything Denny worked on ever influence you?
I mean, pretty much anything that was Batman related, especially during the 80s and 90s, he had his fingers on. So even though my followship of writers is actually fairly new in terms of distinguishing them, because that's the interesting thing is that ever since we started working together and actually making comics, now I pay more attention to like who the writers and editors are. Used to when I was a kid, I only just paid attention to the artists. And obviously, I think Mark, I don't know if you mentioned this or not, but I think we've been in 2 conventions with Denny O'Neil. It's just one of our first major conventions at Alamo City. He was there, and I was just like, that's so strange. I didn't see him that long ago.
And that's the thing is you lose track of time. And there are a lot of people that we did conventions with that I didn't go see because I just assumed that I'd see them next time. Like Bernie Wrightson, we did a show with him, and he died like a couple months after that show was over. And I had just assumed that I would get him next time. And, Mr. Chance. And same thing with Denny O'Neil, we did a couple shows with him, and I always just figured Denny O'Neil's always going to be there. But nope, he's gone. So I missed my chance forever. So my suggestion to people is you go to a convention, If you have a list of people you want to meet all of them, or try your hardest to meet all of them, because you really never know when you're going to miss that chance, and you're never going to get it again.
Definitely. And in my case, I actually had met up with and had like all 3 days of the convention a nice long talk with Dwayne McDuffie a year before he died.
Wow. Oh yeah. And Dwayne McDuffie's death was very unexpected because he was still fairly young. It was a heart surgery, right?
Yeah, it was a surgery that was like right after his birthday, and just something happened during it. And I can remember I hadn't signed about all the books I had written by him up to that point, except for World War Hulk Damage Control, and I thought, maybe next time.
Yeah.
Then I also met Norm Brayfogle, had him do a commission for me. So many others I have. I have I have a few other artworks, or I've met some other. Like I met Alan Goldman, one of the last Golden Age artists, well before he passed away, and that's actually a good story for me. He and his wife were at Motor City Comic Con. That's my local convention, and when I was volunteered, I got sent to help them close up shop, and then they're asking me, where are we going to be? Who's going to drive us over to the shuttle so we can catch our flight? And no one knew the answer. I asked around, they're like, they were told someone was going to drive them over, but that was news to everyone else that was still there. So I stayed with them well past my time where I was supposed to leave until I saw them on the little go-kart, golf cart, to drive them off. And that was definitely a great moment. I felt like Alan's pretty much comic royalty. He's still one of the last Golden Age artists.
Yeah, I think the only person that I've met at a con who's passed away since I met them, so I'm glad that I had the chance, was we did Terror Expo back in like 2015. It was a horror movie convention, and I got to meet Sid Haig, who's Captain Spaulding from the Rob Zombie movies. He's in like Galaxy of Terror and a ton of movies. But I got to meet him. He was really friendly, really nice, because he plays kind of mean guys in all the movies he's in. But in person, he was actually a really nice guy. And he passed away a couple of years ago, so I'm glad that I actually did. I'm glad that I got to meet him while I had the chance.
Well, yeah, definitely. So, as far as what I'm about to ask, I'm not going to ask anything about any particular creators, but any product's been going on with the crowdfunding. Are there any out that you look at and you're like, that's an example of how things should be done? You don't have to tell me anything that shouldn't be done, but as far as like, what examples have you seen of crowdfunding books that you're like, that's a gold standard, or that's the standard we're trying to match?
I think Doug TenNapel is the most obvious one that comes to mind because it's just a checklist of things that you can expect. It's kind of like when you go to a Walmart, for example, and you buy a product. It's not, you don't have to follow a list of instructions. It's just understood that when you give currency, that there's something that happens. You get a product in return. So as far as like what Doug TenNapel does, it's his presentation looks good. The quality of the product is good. You not only get what you pay for, but there's a part of you that actually feels like you got more. And I think as of yet, he's delivered on time on everything to the best of his approximation, if he hasn't been early. So we actually use him to emulate as a model. Another person that we have used as far as a fiduciary aspect is concerned, we actually used a lot of the things that Nasser Rabadi did for his early campaigns, because there's something deceptive that happens in crowdfunding or pre-orders, which is the monetary aspect. So, for example, let's say your comic or anything that you try to do through crowdfunding, let's say you only make $8,000 on it. Well, that might seem like a low number relative to what other people are doing, but what if your overhead was only $500? That means that a Nasser Rabadi would be making $7,500, which is great because his margins are so big that he's minimized his overhead as his profit. So one thing that we try to do for our pre-orders is, yes, we throw in a lot of goodies, but we're not Doug TenNapel, so we can't afford the stuff that he can. But we ask ourselves, what can we afford? Who can we look at to manufacture these products, retain our quality, and still over deliver on a minimal promise to backers? And so for Common America, the big one that we held on to for a long time was we put the money into the holographic cover.
Mm-hmm.
I asked API, I was like, it turns out this is doing better than we thought. Before we actually go to press, what can we do that readers will love in terms of the cover? And they said, well, check this out. We got this holographic technique that we can put on it. And so they gave me a quote, and I budgeted in, and I said, that I think would look fantastic. To put that in, and the
I
same thing
love
with the
that cover.
postcard too. Oh,
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
love
We've
that
had
cover, yeah.
we had 2 people who said that they hated it. Like they literally said they hated it and don't want to see it on the next one. And I'm like, I'm all about customer satisfaction, but this is one of those
When it's
cases where
when it's just 2 people.
Yeah, majority rules in this.
right.
Yep.
Exactly.
I'll say this,
It seems like
though,
people love it.
Yeah, I'll say I prefer the hollow cover over a certain hollow foil cover. Without naming
Well, the irony
names.
was this. So, the irony was I actually tried to find a hollow foil cover because I like hollow foil covers, but there's one company that I think they print out of Arizona, but they don't actually print the books. They print the covers, and then you mail them to your printer, and then your printer puts them on the book. But I just thought, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to begin with that one. But I like the way the holographic one turned out, and I actually had to talk with the printer yesterday, and it turns out that we have like 4 options moving forward. So for Common America 2, like you can expect that we're going to do either the same thing or something different.
Nice. Now I'll say this. I've said this before on my tweet, but you guys are in the rare. I'm guaranteed almost day one, provided I have the money and funds in my account, of course, of backing the account. The only person I have in that range is your boy Zach, who I'm not asking where you guys stand with him, but in my opinion, he has reached a similar thing where you guys are. He does good and very good products, relatively on time, give or take, but he also has matches the price point a lot better than other campaigns who I think lately are overcharging a lot of their books for such low page counts.
We've actually we've met Richard in person because he was a guest at Bell County Comic Con, so we actually were able to get him to the convention. The person who runs Bell County Comic Con is actually the person who does our fulfillment. And the thing with Richard is that, so I think as far as the model that we were talking about with Doug Tenaple, I know that Richard has been delinquent on either 1 or 2 books, but I think the one thing that people know about him is apparently his customer service is really good. So he keeps people abreast
definitely.
as to what's going on. And I think that that's really the best thing you can do, because there are times when lateness can't be helped, but no one likes being kept in the dark. Everyone wants to know and be given an honest answer in terms of what's going on.
Oh yeah, definitely. And Richard definitely was up there. And I think much like you guys, when he has like a very good idea, it is good. Unfortunately, with Iron Size 2, I think he kind of pulled that out of his butt a little. A little bit. With no offense to him, but
so one campaign, and it was a smaller campaign that I backed, and it fulfilled like clockwork. It was excellent. John Celestri, who's an animator, he worked for Nelvana and Disney and Don Bluth and a whole bunch of different people. He did a portfolio in retrospective of his work going back to the 70s, and I backed it because it also came because he was the animator on the Star Wars Holiday Special who animated Boba Fett, and one of the perks was an original sketch of Boba Fett by him, and I really wanted that. So I got that, and I got the portfolio, and one of the perks on it, because I got the higher tier, was a digital copy of his portfolio that would just be sent via email. And he put the date, like, you'll receive your copy on this date. That date came. I got the email. It had the PDF in it. There was no crazy DRM bullcrap. The PDF didn't expire. There's nothing that's like if I posted a screenshot, it would dox my email. There's nothing like that. He just sent me a digital copy of the book like he was supposed to, when he was supposed to. And then I got my hard copy of the portfolio and my sketch in the mail like a few weeks later, on time when it was supposed to. And everybody, so far as I know, who got fulfilled on his campaign, they all got the same world-class treatment. They got everything they were supposed to get when they were supposed to get it. No BS. And it's that was just a really, really easy campaign. As a consumer, just a person giving him money to purchase the item, it went absolutely smoothly. So, I mean, that whole thing went well. And so even people doing smaller campaigns, because his wasn't as big. His was like, I think he only had like a couple hundred backers, but he was doing it all by himself, but he still did everything on time. So even people doing these smaller time campaigns, or these smaller campaigns with fewer backers or whatever, they can still produce everything on time. And there's not really an excuse.
Now, one thing I want to ask, and I know there's going to be a bit of a sore subject, but without naming names, Mark, you were working on a certain campaign that unfortunately has been taken away from you for the most part. Those watching know what we're talking about, but how much of that was your idea? How much it was the other's idea? And originally it was supposed to be part of the Magadavia verse, wasn't it?
Well, no, not that last part, no. So all I can really say, I do have my hands tied about this subject to an extent. I can say that I spent 2018 co-developing the story for this book, and then I wrote the script. I wrote several scripts, and so far only that one for the campaign has been, so far as I know, has been drawn and published. The credits on that book are incorrect. I was not given a story credit. It is not my IP. I did not create the IP, but I did spend a year co-developing the story, so I was disappointed that I was not given a story credit. I was given a credit as writer. However, all the dialogue in that comic was rewritten by somebody else, so it's not my dialogue. I'm just stuck taking credit for it. I won't give my personal opinion on the dialogue, but it's not something I really want my name applied to since I didn't write it. So that was another disappointment. But at the end of the day, it wasn't my campaign. It's not my IP. I was contracted to write some scripts, co-develop the story, do some ad copy and some other things. I did everything that I was contracted to do. I was paid, and the rest is up to the guy who owns that IP and is running that campaign. So that's on him at this point. But yeah, so that's pretty much just behind me now. That's it.
Good. Yep. Okay, because I gotta say, I'll just say, I felt you were done dirty, and believe me, I am still teeter-tottering between wanting to refund that campaign because of how everything's been going with it. Again, without specifying it, I'm just saying I have never felt that way about any campaign except for that one.
And then the other thing too, I mean, like I know that Mark's hands are tied as far as like things that he can and can't say. So I mean, there was a bit of news going around that, I mean, and I've clarified it twice. I've confirmed it to be true, which is that the Black Ops book was actually used as part of a pitch meeting, and the reason why was because there was nothing to show. Now, hindsight is always 20/20, you know, and I think the example I gave was, in hindsight, I think I should have just said no, because I felt like I was helping someone do their homework, when in reality, if you're the A student, you should be doing the homework on your own. You don't have to go to the C student and ask them for their notes when you're already prepared. But it was this idea of, hey, we have a meeting, and you have Black Ops. Can we just go to the meeting as part of the portfolio and say, hey, look at this library of IP that we have? And I said, you can, but it's not yours. As in, like, maybe later down the road, if you'd like it to be, that's a separate conversation. But in the meantime, sure, you know, like, we're on good terms, so let this be how it is. And you can see that in Black Ops issue 2. So in issue 2, that's actually the first appearance of the character, and it actually does tie into the book. And I think that part was actually left intact, but you can actually see that remnant of kind of what was there. Now, in subsequent printings of Black Ops, for conventions we've done and for the upcoming Omnibus, that part has been taken out just because it's a legal matter, and we've replaced it with supplemental material. But the reality is
I didn't see that with my copy because I got it through your store.
Right, and the funny thing is that that copy, Black Ops issue 2, if you have it, I think I haven't. Last time I checked, it was definitely worth more than issue 1, because the speculator market knew that that was the reason why. And actually, we sold out to our conventions because a lot of people knew about it. But the whole thing, if nothing more, it was a learning lesson for Mark and I. We have pretty much publicly stated that we're outsiders. And when it comes to dealing with the quote unquote professionals in the industry, people who do this as like a full time thing, it has soured our opinion on them. And I'm very sorry to say that for people listening who might be professionals. There are definitely people that we like, such as Chuck Dixon, Graham Nolan, Brett Smith, Dave Dorman. These are great people. And by and large, I think most of the people we meet at conventions are good. But it is a very different world. And I just think that the mentality and the culture is different than what we're used to. But the good thing is that what Mark and I do is independent. And because we're independent, moving forward, we have no strings attached. I mean, like Common America was just between him and me and a handful of artists that I got to do covers. Same thing with Black Ops 3, same thing with Common America Volume 2. And moving forward, we're more cautious in terms of who we decide to be acquaintances with, so to speak.
Hey, I still look at you guys as one of the higher rankings still because of, again, how much you guys get out and the quality you guys bring to it all. So you guys are doing far more than a lot of people, both pros and independents in the certain communities.
And a lot of it is just doing the legwork. It's logistics. It's knowing, for example, to have your printer finalized before you start working on something, knowing how big your pages should be. A lot of it is spreadsheets and budgeting and things like of that nature. And so the good news is that for people who are interested in comics, I mean, like our comms are open. Anyone can ask Mark or me in terms of just general advice. Like who would you use for a printer? What are some things to consider about how much does an artist charge? What should my page rate be? These are things where I would like to think that we're open enough so that in a network of people who want to do this, at least as a hobby, that it's not the difficulty is just knowing all of those rudimentary aspects. Once you find out a lot of those numbers, then the rest of it can actually fill in on itself. You just have to know who you can trust to deliver the goods on time.
Right. Now, actually, if I want to ask you guys like a little question, actually, when it comes to story writing, at least, especially you, Mark.
Okay.
I've always had my plans of doing my own comic book and everything. And one thing I've always had is that I want to introduce this team of heroes, but there's one character in particular who's always been one of my favorite creations. But in the team universe, where all these characters exist, she doesn't come until a couple years down the line. But I always am a fan of the multiverse. So I plan on introducing a version of her that she's the sole hero, but it's different than the version I'd be using in the team book. Would that be too confusing for readers, in your opinion, or so long as I make it clear?
It's funny that you mentioned multiverses. Tim and I were actually having a discussion about that last weekend, and we both kind of had a similar opinion. Is our view on multiverses should be that there should be a root universe, a prime universe that the multiverses stem from. So that means they're different from a parallel universe. Those are two universes that are independent of each other and run side by side, but don't branch off from anything.
Exactly.
Our reasoning for that is that if you have all these parallel universes that never intersect outside of when characters jump from one to the other, where that don't come from any singular roots, it means that no one universe is more important than the other. There's no prime universe. So it diminishes the importance of the universe you're telling your story in, because it means that your version of that reality isn't any more important than another one. That was kind of one of our beefs with Into the Spider-Verse, was that anybody can be Spider-Man, and Into the Spider-Verse thing was there was no root universe. There's just all these different Spider-Man universes, and Spider-Gwen was not necessarily any more important to Spider-Man than Peter Parker or Miles Morales or Spider-Ham or any of that. And everybody's Spider-Man, and when everybody's Spider-Man, nobody is. It's kind of our attitude. So if you're going to do a multiverse story, have a prime universe, have a branching off point that you establish, as the point, like Back to the Future. Back to the Future 2 had that branching storyline. That branching part was when Biff stole the DeLorean. But that doesn't mean that there's parallel universes. That just means that history changed and the universe went in a diverging direction from one event that happened in the Prime universe. I would suggest do it that way. That way, the universe you're telling your story in still feels important, like it matters. And that's these other universes are offshoots. They're the child universes of your parent universe.
Right. I know.
And if you do it that way, then you can do whatever you want with your character that comes in from an alternate universe. Whether or not it's confusing, that just comes down to how you tell the story. If you tell it intuitively, then it won't be. But if you tell it Grant Morrison style, then it will be. So it just comes down to how fluidly and how well you tell that tale so as not to confuse anybody.
And very true. Well, in my particular case, it would be she's a robot, techno-organic, but in the one version where she's the solo hero, she has other teams, and all this stuff. But again, she's the sole hero. But when I have her meet her other universe, who is already established as a hero, this will be her later on down the line in the continuity. But when they see her, she's more confident, she's a little older, and basically she's being a version of herself that she's never going to become, but she's still an influence for her. Like, this is what I could still be here, but I'm not going to get there the same way she did.
Well, I mean, that's not that kind of thing isn't too unheard of, even in like some Marvel comics, right? They had this character in the old X-Men comics, the pre-Claremont era, named Changeling, who started out as a villain, and he died in this weird retcon where they brought him back, so he pretended to be Professor X, and then a character called the Subhuman killed him, and it was almost all done in flashback. But that character was revived in the 90s for the cartoon as a character named Morph. Exactly. Morph became really popular, but Changeling was dead. So they did Age of Apocalypse, and they brought in a new version of Morph in this Splinter universe that splintered from the Prime timeline. And even though that version of Morph didn't look like the classic Morph, he had the personality of the 90s cartoon Morph. They kind of combined the two and gave their original design to it.
Same with Blink.
Yeah, and same with Blink. And so,
Blink actually had a grisly death originally.
But that's a case, though, where they have this different character who was introduced at one point in the timeline, and they introduced another version of him from a Splinter timeline later on, and it wasn't really that confusing. They explained it very well, and you understood the differences between Changeling from the 60s and Morph from the 90s, and it was done really well.
Yeah, can I say, the way the original Blink went out, like, didn't she go into, like, the rotor blades of a ship or a boat or something?
Well, she deserved it.
That was
she deserved it for
Next,
sleeping with a nihilist. You sleep with a nihilist, you get what's coming to you.
That was the Blink from the Age of Apocalypse universe. I think he's referring to the 616 universe.
Oh,
Blink,
that's right.
And how she died in Generation X.
Rotary blades or something.
And so when Mark and I were having that discussion, one of the things that came up was I said, I just have a general distaste for parallel universes because we were approached by someone who said, hey, can we use the Common America for a parallel universe where things are a little bit different? And I was like hesitant on it because I was like, I have a very formed opinion regarding that based on the trend right now in a lot of, especially Marvel comics. And so Mark was like, well, you like Age of Apocalypse. Why is that different? And I said, well, it's different because the Age of Apocalypse was splintered from the definite 616 universe upon the death of Charles Xavier, which is why they had to go back in time and basically fix that.
You had a point of divergence, in other words, as opposed to who knows where it diverged, but now where do you stand on Elseworlds, though?
That's the thing about Elseworlds. So the reason why I didn't mind Elseworlds was, especially when I was a kid, it was never presented as an alternate universe. In fact, I think the Batman books, they basically treated it like almost like Tales from the Crypt or not Unsolved Mysteries, like Twilight Zone, where I think the prologue for a lot of the Elseworlds books were these are legends, these are stories. Some of them may have happened, some of them may have never happened at all, but they're just interesting takes of characters that you might know of. So it was this kind of like flowery language that basically just said, look, this is just a variation of the character.
So,
Don't treat it so canonical in terms of
right.
its
Right.
place in
So
universe.
before DC coined the term Elseworlds, in the Silver Age they called them imaginary stories, and
Aren't
that
they
was
all?
exactly aren't they all imaginary? But yeah, it was that thing like, hey, it's not canon, it doesn't matter, don't worry about it.
Another
This
Earth.
is just for fun. Yeah, right. It's on another Earth, or it's imaginary. Even within the context of the DC universe, this story is imaginary and not real. And that was just the way they did that, so no one would have to worry about where it fits into some sort of continuity, or Elseworlds, or Earth 71000B when they're doing that Silver Age. They didn't have to worry about that. It was imaginary.
Yeah. Well, in my case, if I was to ever do something, and if I ever get off the ground, I would love to one day have my characters either interact with Common America or let you guys just do a little short story that is an alternate version of Common America, but it's one where my characters coexist with her, and so it's just a little adventure, so you don't have to go through the hoops of how these two meet. It's like, no, this is a version where they do exist. It's just not canon with Common America's story. Would that be all right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's good because, for example, like like Brian Ball, he's writing the crossover book between Rags and Punchline and USAGI, and I think he has a gag in there where USAGI has a thumb, like he can actually like hold a gun, and he asked me, he was like, because I looked at this script, like the first draft, and I said, hey, USAGI has a thumb. In reality, he doesn't. Like he's a rabbit, so he has limitations. And it's like, well, the way I see it is you just ignore it. Like when it comes to writing your own book, just ignore that part like it never happened. And I just thought, oh, okay, like that's fine. If someone wants to treat it as canonical, we'll just leave that up to the reader in terms of explaining away, like how in the world does he have a thumb in one thing versus the other? Does it really matter? It's such a superfluous
Whereas
detail.
Patriotter definitely has a thumb.
Patriotter definitely has a thumb. He can definitely like shoot weapons and stuff. But I think Mark put it the best way. It's this idea that because we do have a few continuity errors not errors, but they're definitely some differences. For example, in Black Ops 1, there's a reference to President Trump, but if it exists in the same universe as Wall Might, why is he called Trump? Because
exactly.
Right, because Wall Might has two names. In Wall Might Part
Trump
2,
is a Maximus or something.
Yeah, he's Donaldus Magnus, and then he becomes Wall Might. So the way because when we're driving and we're like, okay, how do we answer these questions in case people ask us at conventions? We just tell people it's like, well, he has three names. It's like a nickname, like sometimes it's Muhammad Ali, sometimes it's Cassius Clay. Like it just depends on how people want to say it. But it's kind of like in reality, we're like, we get it. Sometimes we overlook these really tiny details, but it's the idea that it's like a Venn diagram. You're going to have this center where there's an overlap, but once you're out of that overlap in each separate instance, you're going to have this independency that happens.
And so the example that I give people about how our shared universe functions with its interconnecting continuity is to think about the 1980s Marvel Transformers and G.I. Joe comics.
Oh, yeah.
They coexisted. They shared a universe, and they would periodically cross over. If the G.I. Joes met the Transformers and they killed Bumblebee, in the next issue, Bumblebee would get rebuilt as Goldbug. So what they did when they intersect, their continuities impact each other. But when they're away from each other, they do different things in their individual stories, their isolated stories, that don't carry over from one to the other. Like in Transformers Generation 2, they blew up San Francisco. But in the G.I. Joe comics, San Francisco was still there and never got blown up because that happened in stories where they weren't crossing over.
So in other words, when the crossovers are the only thing that's important for influence on the other book, but once they go back, now if they were ever meet up again, oh Lord, good luck trying to explain that one.
Right. So that's how we kind of feel about it. Is that the heaviest continuity that carries over happens when these characters meet each other, but when not necessarily within Common America or Black Ops, when they're in their own stories, is there the deep state that lives in a Legion of Doom head in a swamp outside the Washington Monument. Like that's not necessarily happening within the sanctity of the Common America or Black Ops universes. But when they intersect, that's when those continuities collide. That's just sort of how we handle it.
Now, is Carly going to ever reference her being turned to Carl Manverse at all? Or...
that's funny because in Common America, there's a very quick Easter egg of Walmart, and it's lifted directly from the book. So we might reference it in the future, just as a throwaway gag, but it's understood that at least in our heads, it actually happened, and she just chooses not to talk about it because it was embarrassing.
Yeah,
why would she?
Not like you're going to give her a nightmares over it.
Right.
Knowing anyone else, I think that would give any person nightmares that I got turned into a man.
Yeah, it's like, let's just never speak of this again.
I can so see it. Someone trying to bring it up like, hey, Dandy, that didn't happen. But I'm pretty sure don't want to talk about it. I can still see her doing that. But now there's always going to be the possibility of you guys doing future spin-off IPs if you ever get a good idea, obviously, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're always available for that. It's just that with our workload and with our limited time, we really had to pare it down to two and just focus on those two and get those out of the way, then try to juggle 3 or 4 independent titles.
Right.
We both have day jobs, so there's 40 hours a week in which we can't work on comics is when we're working on our day jobs. So that cuts back on how much we can do. So basically what we're putting out now is pretty much us at max capacity.
And yet that's still more than most people in the crowdfunding community. The only other person I can say is, again, the only other person I can say is your boy Zach, but he just writes it. He doesn't do any drawings.
Yeah, we try to stay productive, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So, here's a different question. Is there any current books you've been reading from any of the big two or whatnot that you still feel like, hey, this is still some good quality writing or work?
From the big
two? Only thing I can my list is a lot shorter than Mark's, so really the only thing I pick up consistently is I pick up Red Hood and the Outlaws by Scott Lobdell.
Oh, Nerdette would love you for that one, since she's so upset that they're canceling it.
I know, and actually, I don't know if that's listening, but I think she's actually the reason why I picked it up was because I had heard, I'm pretty sure on her channel, that it was good, and so I gave it a look-see. And actually, I'm trying. Who was it? We were on with Matthew Reese last night, and I told him hey, if you want to pick up a good book, you should pick up Red Hood and the Outlaws, but make sure to start with The Dark Trinity, Volume 1, the Rebirth line. That's some good stuff.
Or at the very least, get the Omnibus for the New 52 stuff, since while the wrapping up arc is tying back into that.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's neat. Yeah,
the current stuff that's going on right now in the book is going all the way back to the New 52, of which there's an omnibus for it.
Cool.
Oh, great. That's good to know.
Yep. Well, what about you, Mark?
I mean, I'm not reading anything contemporary from Marvel or DC. They've pretty much lost me as a reader for any of their modern stuff. But I do pick up trades of their older stuff. Marvel's been doing those epic collections of which has been a great line, by the way. And I'm trying to collect as many of the X books and the Spider-Man collections they've been putting out. They're putting them out faster than I can afford them, and they keep going out of print too fast. That's my big complaint. That it's the best content that Marvel has in their catalog, and they just can't keep them in print. But I've been reading those, and they're all those are the golden years of Marvel. That's their best stuff. DC's got a little bit of catching up to do. I've been picking up their Batman, the Caped Crusader, and Batman, the Dark Knight Detective collections, which starts post-Crisis of Batman and Detective Comics, and then just move forward. And it's collecting all the stories with the exception for some reason they cut out Death in the Family and Lonely Place of Dying, because I guess they wanted people to buy those separately because they're money. But I already own those anyways, so it's no big deal. But yeah, I've been reading a lot of stories that were never collected before, and I never had the opportunity to read from my favorite era of Batman, the late 80s, early 90s, So I read like The Return of the Joker, which was, when Joker came back after Death in the Family, which is one that had never been collected before, and I'd always wanted to read it. And so I finally got to, and I really enjoyed it. Like 10 Nights of the Beast, the one that had KG Beast in it. That I really wanted to read, and I finally found it. So, I mean, I've been enjoying that. They're finally covering all of the Bronze Age Swamp Thing stories. The stuff that came after Bernie Wrightson and Len Wein left, but before Alan Moore started up in Saga Swamp Thing. They're finally bridging that gap in their trades. So I've been reading those, and that's a whole bunch of classic Swamp Thing I've never read before. So that's been great. But in terms of like other stuff, I've been reading mostly manga. I'm kind of checking out a lot of the Japanese stuff I've never read before. I've been picking up Viz's Junji Ito hardbacks, and I've just
I've heard about that. I've heard of Junji Ito.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I haven't read a bad Junji Ito story. Right now, I'm reading No Longer Human, which is very different from a lot of his usual stuff. It's not quite in the body horror and gross out vein as some of his stuff. It's much more psychological, but it's a very good book. I read through Go Nagai's Devilman, and I read, let's see, what was his name again? Go Tanabe did a whole bunch of H.P. Lovecraft adaptations, and so 3 volumes are out so far, and I read through all those, and they were very good. So there's a lot of manga that I'm catching up on that I never read before. So, I mean, there are good comics out there. You just have to, I think people just need to learn to look past Marvel and DC. If you don't like what they're publishing now, they've got 80 years of history that you can go back and read. If you're not interested in any of that, then there's manga, there are other publishers, there are lots of other books out there for people to read. So comics aren't dead, and they're probably never going to be. You just got to look in the right places.
I agree. And I got to say, for my example, I've been getting most of my Marvel books I get lately are their omnibuses. Like I just got, with the exception of Fantastic Four, but that's for obvious reasons, I got all the Heroes Reborn titles, at least their main runs, in omnibus forms, their initial runs. So I got like 2 Thors, 2 Avengers, 1 Captain America, and 1 Iron Man. And I got to say, looking through Dan Jurgens' Thor, I think Jason Aaron ripped off a lot of his ideas. I don't know if you ever read that run. Yeah.
So, Jason Aaron's written some stuff that I've liked. So Tim and I just agree on this one. I like Jason Aaron's run on Ghost Rider. Tim didn't like it and couldn't finish it. So we have different attitudes in that one, but I really like that one. And Jason Aaron also wrote a Friday the 13th miniseries for Wildstorm called How I Spent My Summer Vacation. I think it was like a 2-issue miniseries, and it was actually pretty good. So he's written some good stuff, but that's really all of his that I've read.
I agree.
So some of his other stuff I've read about it, and it doesn't sound very good. So I'm just kind of I'm going to keep it preserved in my memory as having enjoyed those 2 things, and I'll just stop it there.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying his Thor. Like I said, I'm seeing a lot of Dan Jurgens' Thor in it. Not all, but it's like it looks like he took some of Dan's ideas and then went off in his own direction with it. But it still bugs me. I'm like, everyone's like, oh, this is fresh. Dan Jurgens did it first. Like made him ruler of Asgard, gave us a female Thor, things like that. It's just like, yeah, Dan Jurgens did it first. This isn't new. But yeah, I mean, with me, I'm still keeping up with the current stuff personally. There's a lot of stuff I read. As far as manga, I've read a lot, but I've only through the library. The only one I have 2 series I ever own completely are all of the Tokyo Pop printings of Love Hina, which I think is the better translation, and Saber Marionette J, mostly because that's one of my favorite animes of all time.
That's old school. You got old school taste right there.
Yep. I mean, Love and Saber Marionette J, that's one of those where I bring it up to people and they're like, what's that? I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, that's
I got the box set with it, and I took it to one of my first anime conventions at YomaCon. And I actually saw Brad Swiley, had him sign it because he did the voice cast of one of the characters in the first dub. Each of the series had different dubbings. I hate when that happens. But when I showed it to him, he was like, whoa. Like, he was like shocked to see this box set. He was just
the funny thing is this. I don't know about, I think Mark has a complete manga collection of, I think, Dragon Ball. I actually don't have any complete manga collection of anything. I was getting One Punch Man, but it's ongoing, and I quit right. Yeah, I quit right after tournament that they had, it was kind of spinning its wheels, and so I just kind of figured that would be a good place to end it. But ironically enough, I don't have a full collection of any manga so far.
Yeah. But have you ever read Love Hina? Either of you?
Harem animes aren't really my thing, so no.
Oh.
Sorry.
So no. I say the Tokyo Pop is one of the ones where, aside from a few hiccups, it's one of those translated where it flows better. Whereas the current one that I think Viz has done, it's a more straightforward, very more faithful, but very stilted. It's like the Tokyo Pop adds more pop culture references into it, but at the same time, and once you get past that though, you're like, okay, this actually does flow a bit more. It's the only problem is they were translating it as it was coming out. So when they made a translation of Tokyo University, they didn't realize that the specific phrasing of Kodiayu was more important than saying Tokyo U, but they couldn't reverse that.
That's always tough when you have these translations, because especially, like, I think Mark was telling me about how translating like South Park and King of the Hill into other languages is tough because there's so many jokes that revolve
right over
around
their heads.
Yeah, and not just that, but they revolve around an understanding of the language itself. Like the joke doesn't work in any type of translation because you have to only know it in the form in which it was originally like spelled or written or said.
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly. I mean, I can imagine, especially with those shows. But well, but as far as besides the big two, are there any indie books like or IDW, Image, or whatnot that you've ever had a liking for? Like for me, Godland and Bomb Queen. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. You guys ever read any books like that? You know, books that were like very obscure, but when you read them, you're like, oh, this is so good.
I mean,
nothing
I
outside of Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, I mean, from IDW, I still read their Ninja Turtles and Ghostbusters. Unfortunately, they've all been put on hold because of the whole Diamond COVID thing. But Ninja Turtles, I've been debating dropping after issue 100. It hasn't been very good. Ghostbusters has still been good. Turtle? Yeah, about Jenica, the new main character, the Poochie character.
These Venus had potential that unfortunately Saban screwed up.
Well, here's the thing about Jenica, and I'm just going to make this quick, is that she's been in the book since like issue 35. She's been around a long time, but she was boring as a human and she's boring as a turtle. It's just the same product in different packaging. And turning her into the main character of the book I don't know. But yeah, I'm just losing interest in it rapidly. I am kind of interested in The Last Ronin because that's basically, they dusted off an old miniseries concept that Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird came up with when they were still working together back in the 80s. And they're going to develop that into a full miniseries. So I am interested in that. Ghostbusters Year One got cut off. It was good, but it got cut off because of the Diamond thing, and so it's still one issue short from being done. But Eric Burnham's Ghostbusters book is really good. It just comes out sporadically now. Other than that, no, I haven't. I mean, I've read obscure stuff in the past, that I've read 100 times, but currently, no, nothing.
Well, yeah, because they just announced that Jimmy Robinson's going to do a new Bomb Queen trump card, but he said it's going to insult, offend everyone. Given how his one arc he did with President Obama went, I'm looking forward to it. Have you guys ever read Bomb Queen?
No.
It sorry. Is. Let me just put it this way. Jimmy Robinson said he was an Obama fan, big fan, but throughout the arc, basically Obama's trying to take down Bomb Queen, who basically rules the city. And Bomb Queen, by the end of it, she impregnates herself, claiming it's his own child, so no one else would hit her. And then by the end of it, she puts a bomb collar on their puppy and blows up the White House, maims Obama, and then blows up the rest of the country. And he's a fan of the guy, so think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in any type of parody or satire, part of the humor is just being honest with how the jokes can work, which is why whenever people read Wall Might or My Hero Macadamia, a lot of them are shocked to find out that we're actually pro-Trump, because they say like, well, in this scene, why does Walmart do this? Like, it looks stupid. And I'm like, well, because it's like a Trumpian thing. Like, that Trump says things a lot of times that come across as crass or come across as being the way that, non-presidential. So it's like,
Oh yeah.
we have to work that in, because even though we like him, a lot of that stuff we find endearing, a lot of people find nauseating or they find gross. And that's fine, but it's honest. Like, that's how humor works. What makes people laugh is that there is something funny about the situation that hopefully most people can recognize. It's kind of like on the way over here, because Mark, as a writer, there's kind of an analytic component to writing. There's kind of a science to it that's embedded in it. And so he was telling me this quote from The Simpsons, and it's where McBain is in an action movie, and he's on the top of a fighter plane, and he's ripping off the cockpit. So he's ripping the cockpit off, and the pilot says, "I surrender." And McBain says to the pilot, what does he say, Mark?
He said, "Not so fast." And then he breaks his neck. It's like, and Tim and I couldn't stop laughing. I retold a joke from 30 years ago, but it was still funny.
Yeah, because it's like, I surrender. Not so fast. Like, what, not so fast in surrendering?
That's a surrender. Like, exactly. So it doesn't need explanation, because the fact is, A, this guy was trying to surrender, but you're matching it with B, the typical like action movie knee-jerk response. That's the funny part. And it's this idea that in humor, and I think that's why a lot of comedians who try to make fun of Trump, they fail miserably, because they hate him. And because they hate him so much, it's not funny. It's just mean-spirited is how it comes across. Like,
it's like George Carlin's my standard for how you do that type of comedy, where he talks about stuff that even he doesn't agree with, but he sees the humor in it.
right.
Like, I love the sun, but I don't worship the sun. Things like that. But
Yes,
I gotta
exactly.
say, one example I could think, and Mark, tell me if you actually did write this bit. It's in Trump Space Force, where if you did it with one of your punch-ups, where you have the aliens visiting, and basically the Secret Service comes in and says, "It's okay, guys. This alien's illegal, but he's just visiting." It's just like, oh, jeez. It's like,
I can't remember if that was me or Chuck, so I'm going to go ahead and give Chuck credit for it. So,
but that's
I can't recall.
a Trump moment of like, yeah, he's illegal, but he's just visiting. It's like, wow, talk about being dismissive of a guy who's helping you. That still cracked me up, that one. It's just like, he would so say that. But but yeah, though, but I just gotta say, like, once again, your guys' work. I'm running out of things to talk about, obviously, so I think we should start wrapping things up. But I want to say again, thank you guys for doing this, and again, just keep up the great work. Obviously, you already guys promoted a lot of your stuff throughout this, so I don't need to ask you what you guys got coming forward. So, any parting words you guys want to give?
No, I just want to thank you for taking a chance on reading a lot of our work. And I don't know if she's in here or not still, but Nerdette's Newsstand, she recently, I think on Comixology, she was reading My Hero Macadamia. And actually, I think she was responsible for us going into a 9th printing, because that just came out of the blue. Like, I would say within like 48 hours of her review coming out, Antarctic Press sold out. And we're always grateful, no matter how long it takes. But even when you have new readers coming in to find what we do, as long as we're making you happy and you like our work, then I feel like we've accomplished what we sought out to do. Just to give people a heads up in terms of what we have planned, Walmart, the Gold Standard Omnibus, the pre-orders for that are going to be finished at the end of the month. And then immediately, once we start fulfillment in the first or second week of July, we will be doing Black Ops 3. This is going to be our second time announcing this, but the plot of Black Ops 3 is a direct tie-in to Common America. So it actually will bridge events that happen between Common America Volume 1 and Volume 2. So if you're a completist and you want to know, like, how did this happen? Like, how did this connect? Then you will want to pick that one up. And then we will have Volume 2 of Common America in the fall. followed by volume 3 in the spring. So those are going to be 2 back-to-backs. And then Black Hops will be a event. And that's kind of our model moving forward. But we want to thank everyone who came in tonight and listened. Thank you for spending your Friday night with us. We appreciate it. If you're in Arkansas, and especially Central Arkansas this weekend, we are going to be at the Saline Comic Expo. It's the first post-COVID convention that we're attending. So if you're local, make sure to stop by and check us out.
All right. And yep. Anything from you to say, Mark?
No, just ditto. Tim pretty much said it all.
All right, then. Well, it's been great having you guys, and we'll see you guys on another stream. Take care.
Thank you so much. Have a good